Wine. We love it, and it's been around for thousands of years. Now you might think of those big producing countries like Italy and France and Spain to be where wine's home is, but actually wine's history started way back and more in the Middle Eastern countries like Georgia. And the oldest winery was actually to be found in Armenia, dating back to over 4,000 years BC. Now there are over 7,000 hectares of grapevines planted across the globe, and about half of them are in Europe. Now those three countries I mentioned, Italy, France and Spain, just them alone produce about half of the world's wine. But let's not forget about the rest of the world and move out of Europe into the New World, down the Southern Hemisphere, where you might find wines coming from India and China, and ever increasingly coming from the UK too. Did you know there are over 1,300 grape varieties? So there's plenty to explore. Now, wine is way more than just yeast turning sugary grape juice into alcohol. It's definitely an art form. So let's see how we can make the most of these wines by tasting them. Okay, so number one, first up, colour gives you clues. Now, you start to guess a lot about a wine even before you put it anywhere near your mouth. It's the colour that gives you some clues. Different grape varieties have slightly different tinges to them. It can also give an idea of the body. So, if you have a red wine, okay, mine's a white wine. But if you just pour a little bit of your red wine into your glass and look down, if you can't see the stem of the glass, then you know that's a fuller bodied wine. Also, it gives you an idea about the age. So red wines actually go lighter with age and develop more of a brownish, tawny colour. And white wines, they go a little bit darker with age and develop more of a kind of a golden colour. Number two. Now perhaps you have wondered why people sniff their wines, or maybe you feel a little bit silly giving it a swirl. But let me tell you, it's very important to swirl and sniff your wine, because otherwise you might miss out on half of what this wine is trying to give to you. Maybe this wine is amazingly aromatic and it's just jumping out from the glass. Or maybe it will smell differently to how it tastes, and you wouldn't want to miss out on that. Some wines have been sleeping in their bottles for years, and it's this oxygen that helps wake up those flavours. So, give it a swirl. Number three, taste is texture. Now, when you have a glass of wine, what you want to do is not exactly use it like mouthwash, but I want the whole mouth to be able to taste this wine. The whole mouth can experience exactly what this wine has to offer. Now, that's because you taste different things in different parts of your mouth. So, you'll taste the sweetness on the very tip of your tongue. You'll feel the tannins gripping at your gums, and you'll feel the acidity pull at the insides of your cheeks, and you'll start to salivate. The more acidity, the more you'll start to salivate. Lovely. Now, texture is also about the body of the wine. And here's a little tip talking about milk. Now, how whole milk feels very different in your mouth to skimmed milk. It's the same idea with the body of the wine. A fuller bodied wine will feel very, very different and fuller in your mouth compared to a sort of lighter bodied wine, a little bit more like skimmed milk. Up next is describing your wine. Now, once you've done all of those 3 points, you've got to describe it, right? And describing wine is tough. There are a lot of intimidating wine words out there, but wine is very personal, and there's not really any wrong answer to this. But to help you, let's break it down. So first up, your primary flavours is your fruits and your flowers. So is it more like green fruits, like apples and pears? Maybe citrus fruits, lemon and grapefruit and orange, and maybe orange peel rather than orange the fruit? Could it be more riper fruit flavours like tropical fruits, maybe mangoes or pineapples? And with red wine, is it your red fruits or black fruits? So is it like your strawberries and your raspberries, or is it blackberries, black currants, maybe bramble? Then your flowers. That's the difference between maybe chamomile, elderflower, or rose. Or perhaps it's more herbaceous, so is it like a green bell pepper, or is it like tomato leaf or grass? Second up is about the secondary flavours, and that's more taking into account winemaking methods. So you've got biscuits and brioche and bready notes that have come from the yeast that has done all the fermenting. Or maybe it's vanilla and toast you can taste, which has come from using oak. And lastly, it's tertiary flavours, and that's about how old the wine is, where things get a little nutty, cooked fruits, or maybe leather and tobacco. But after all that, if something that comes to mind is a little bit obscure, that's totally fine too. Perhaps this wine tastes like you're licking a wet rock or sniffing a summer garden hedge. That's totally cool too, as long as it makes sense to you. At this point, feel free to pause the video to check out this aromas and flavours guide. It gives you some ideas of some different fruits, spices, veggies and others to hopefully help you out when describing your wines. And lastly, number 5, and maybe the most important part, is if you actually like the wine. Now you can assess the quality nice and simply. First up is whether or not it's balanced. Or is there one thing that just stands out amongst the rest? A little bit like when you have really salty food and that's all that you can taste. Next up is length. So how long can you taste those flavours for? The longer the length, the higher quality the wine is. And lastly, the complexity. How many of those flavours can you taste in that wine? The more complex, the higher quality. And lastly, maybe you want to give it a score, but ultimately, would you decide to drink it again? So there you go, that's my top tips for tasting wine.